He stood at the pinnacle of his world, a king in a glass tower, overlooking a city that bowed to his wealth. He had it all, a billion-dollar company, a name that commanded respect, and a beautiful wife carrying his first child. But in a single brutal moment, the gleam of ambition in his eyes turned to poison. He made a choice, trading his family for a bigger fortune, throwing his pregnant wife out into the cold, unforgiving night. He believed he was untouchable. He never imagined that her quiet, unassuming father was the one man on earth who could dismantle his entire empire with nothing more than a keyboard and a lifetime of silent promises. This is the story of how a titan of industry was brought to his knees not by a rival, but by a father's love, and forced to bow before the family he tried to destroy. Ethan Blackwood loved the view from his penthouse. It was a conqueror's view. From the 63rd floor, the city of Seattle sprawled below a tapestry of glittering lights and crawling traffic. Every pinprick of light representing a life he had in some small way surpassed. His company, Blackwood Capital, was a leviathan in the world of high-frequency trading, a machine of his own design that devoured market inefficiencies and spat out obscene profits. At 34, he was the self-made king of a digital empire, and his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass was that of a man who had never known failure. His wife, Clara, was the perfect complement to his steel-edged ambition. She was the soft grace to his hard angles, an artist whose gentle spirit seemed to soothe the frantic predatory energy that always thrummed just beneath his skin. They had met 3 years prior at a charity gala. He was there to network a shark in a tuxedo, and she was there because her latest painting had been donated for the auction. He'd been captivated not by her beauty alone, but by her utter lack of artifice. She didn't know who he was, and when he told her, she wasn't impressed by the money, but curious about the mind that built the machine. Their life was a meticulously curated dream. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, spontaneous trips to Paris on the private jet, a home filled with priceless art and minimalist furniture. Yet for Clara, the penthouse sometimes felt less like a home and more like a beautiful, sterile museum. Ethan was often distant, his mind 1,000 miles away, lost in the cascading numbers and algorithms that were his true passion. She loved him deeply, but she loved the man she saw in rare, unguarded moments, the one who would watch old movies with her, his head in her lap, or the one who truly listened as she described the colors of a sunset. The news of her pregnancy was supposed to be the final, perfect piece of their life. When she told him, placing his hand on her still flat stomach, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes she couldn't decipher. It wasn't the pure, unadulterated joy she had expected. It was more complex, like a master strategist recalculating variables on a battlefield. "A son?" he'd said, his voice a low hum. "A Blackwood heir, to carry on the name." It wasn't "our baby" or "I'm so happy." It was about legacy, about an asset. The coldness of it was a tiny splinter in her heart, one she tried desperately to ignore. The distance between them grew in the following months. Ethan was working on the biggest deal of his career, a hostile takeover of Sterling Industries, a much older, more established tech firm, run by the formidable Harrison Sterling. It was a brutal, bloody corporate war, and Ethan was consumed by it. He came home later, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity, the scent of coffee and ozone clinging to his clothes. Clara, now 4 months pregnant, and starting to show, tried to be the supportive wife. She made sure his favorite single malt was waiting. She ran him baths. She tried to talk to him about names for the baby, about turning one of the spare rooms into a nursery. "Not now, Clara." He'd snap his gaze, fixed on the multiple monitors in his home office. "This sterling deal is everything. Do you have any idea what this means?" She didn't, not really. She just knew it was taking her husband from her. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Ethan came home early, which was unusual. He didn't look tired. He looked energized, electric. There was a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face she hadn't seen before. "I did it," he announced, shrugging off his $1,000 coat and tossing it onto a chair. "I broke him. Harrison Sterling is finished." "Ethan, that's good," she said, confused by his tone. "It's better than good. It's magnificent," he said, pouring himself a drink. He turned to her, and his eyes were cold, assessing. "Clara, we need to talk." The splinter in her heart twisted. "Okay," she said, her hand instinctively going to her belly. He took a long swallow of his drink before speaking. "The terms of the final acquisition are delicate. Harrison is a proud man. To make this work, to merge our companies and create a true global powerhouse, certain alliances must be made." "Alliances? What do you mean?" He walked over to the window, his back to her. "Harrison has a daughter, Isabella Sterling. She's brilliant, ruthless. She's been running their European division. She's a partner, in the truest sense of the word." A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Clara's veins. "Ethan, what are you saying?" He turned around, and any trace of the man she loved was gone. In his place was a stranger, a predator, who had just closed in on his prey. "The deal is contingent on a merger of families as well as companies. A marriage between me and Isabella. It solidifies the empire. It's the final move on the chessboard." The world tilted. The crystal glass of water in her hand slipped and shattered on the polished marble floor. A marriage, Ethan, you're married to me. We're having a baby." Her voice was a choked whisper. "That," he said, gesturing dismissively at her stomach, "is a complication, an unfortunate variable." The cruelty of his words was like a physical blow. "A complication. This is your child. It's a problem I can solve with money," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I will set you up, you and the child. You'll have an apartment, a generous trust fund. You'll want for nothing. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, of course. To everyone, our marriage simply didn't work out. Amicable split." Tears were streaming down her face, now hot and furious. "You think you can buy your child? You think you can just erase us because we're no longer convenient for your business deal? Who are you?" "I am the man who is offering you a comfortable life," he said, his patience thinning. "This is a much better deal than you'd get from any divorce court. I'm being generous." "Generous?" she shrieked, the sound raw and broken. "You're a monster." His face hardened into a mask of pure, chilling indifference. "I am a realist. This is the world I operate in. Love, sentiment. They are luxuries, Clara. Liabilities. I am building an empire, and an empire requires sacrifice. Isabella understands that. You, with your paintings and your feelings, you were a pleasant diversion. But the game has changed." He walked to the bedroom and came back with her suitcase, the one she used for weekend trips. He opened it on the floor. "Pack your things," he said. "The doorman will call you a car. I want you out of here tonight." She stared at him, at the suitcase, at the shattered pieces of glass and the shattered pieces of her life on the floor. "Ethan, please," she begged, one last desperate appeal. "Don't do this. Think about our baby." He looked at her. truly looked at her, and for a second she thought she saw a flicker of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by an iron resolve. "The deal with Sterling closes in a month. Isabella is already flying in." "You need to be gone," he stated, as if discussing a line item on a balance sheet. "The choice is simple, Clara. Leave with the money and your dignity, or be thrown out with nothing. But either way, you are leaving." The love she had for him curdled into something bitter and cold. The man she had married was a ghost, a fiction she had created in her own mind. This man, this creature of pure, unadulterated greed, was the reality. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she stopped crying. She squared her shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. "I don't want your money, Ethan. I don't want anything from you." She turned, walked into the bedroom, and packed not her expensive clothes or jewelry, but the few things that truly mattered: a photo of her parents, a book of poetry her mother had given her, and the first ultrasound picture of their baby. When she came back out, he was on his phone already talking business, his voice sharp and commanding. He didn't even look up as she walked past him, her suitcase rolling softly on the marble floor. As she waited for the elevator, the cold reality hit her. She was 4 months pregnant, homeless, and her life had just been liquidated like a failing stock. And the man she once promised to love for eternity hadn't even had the decency to say goodbye. The taxi ride felt like a descent into a different reality. The gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Seattle, once symbols of a shared future, now seemed to mock her, their lights cold and alien. Each drop of rain that slid down the window was a tear for the life that had just been so clinically excised. The driver, a kind-faced man named George, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. He had asked, "Where to, ma'am?" And all she could whisper was an address in Bainbridge Island, an address she hadn't called home in years. The ferry ride across Puget Sound was a blur of mist and sorrow. Clara stood on the deck, the cold, salty wind whipping at her face, pulling her coat tighter around her pregnant belly. It was as if she was crossing a Stygian river, leaving the land of the living, or at least the world of Ethan Blackwood, behind. She was heading home. Her parents, Robert and Mary Thompson, lived in a modest, cedar-shingled house nestled amongst pine trees overlooking the water. It was the house she grew up in, a place of warmth, worn wooden floors, and the constant smell of her mother's baking, and the faint, clean scent of her father's workshop. When the taxi pulled up the gravel driveway, the porch light was already on, casting a warm, welcoming glow. Her mother Mary must have been watching from the window. The front door flew open before Clara had even paid the driver. Mary Thompson was a woman whose kindness was etched into the lines around her eyes. She took one look at her daughter's pale, tear-streaked face and the single suitcase, and her expression shifted from confusion to a fierce, maternal understanding. "Oh, my baby," she whispered, wrapping Clara in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and home. Clara collapsed into her mother's arms, the carefully constructed dam of her composure finally breaking, and she sobbed long and raggedly. Inside, her father, Robert Thompson, was standing by the fireplace. He was a tall, quiet man, a retired software architect, whose gentle demeanor belied a mind of formidable intellect. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a bedrock. He took her suitcase from her hand, his large, calloused hand briefly squeezing hers. It was all the comfort he needed to offer. She knew he was there. Over hot tea and toast that Clara couldn't eat, she told them everything. The words tumbled out in a broken, agonizing stream, The sterling deal, Isabella. The cold, transactional way Ethan had dismissed her and their unborn child. She spoke of the ultimatum, the suitcase, the utter finality in his eyes. Mary listened, her face a mask of grief and fury, tears welling in her own eyes. Robert, however, was unnervingly still. He sat in his old leather armchair, his hands steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He just listened, absorbing every single painful detail. The silence from him was more profound than any shout could have been. When Clara finished, her voice raw and hoarse, Mary was the first to speak. That monster. I will call a lawyer first thing in the morning. We will fight him. He will not get away with this. Clara shook her head, feeling utterly defeated. What's the point, Mum? He has a team of the best lawyers in the country. He'll bury us in legal fees. He said he would. He'll paint me as a gold digger and drag my name through the mud. I can't. Robert finally moved. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and his eyes, when they met Clara's, were not filled with pity but with a calm, analytical fire. Did he threaten you? He asked, his voice low and even. Not physically, Clara said. He just made it clear. I was an obstacle to be removed, that I should take the money and disappear quietly for my own good. And you have this in writing, any emails, texts? No, she whispered. He was too smart for that. It was all in person, in our home. Robert nodded slowly, his mind clearly working, processing the information like lines of code. He looked at her belly, then back at her face. You are safe here, he said. It wasn't a platitude. It was a statement of absolute fact. You and your child will have everything you need. This is your home. You will not worry about money. You will not worry about Ethan Blackwood. Later that night, tucked into her childhood bed, the familiar scent of lavender from her mother's garden drifting through the window, Clara felt a fragile sense of safety. But beneath it, a current of fear still ran deep. Ethan wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature in his world. He crushed his enemies. What was to stop him from crushing her just to be thorough? She drifted into a troubled sleep and woke hours later thirsty. As she padded down the hallway, she saw a light on in her father's study. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking in, she saw him sitting in front of a complex multi-monitor computer setup, a system far more advanced than anything a typical retiree would own. The screen was filled with flowing lines of code market data streams and complex network architecture diagrams. He wasn't looking at family photos or reading the news. He was working. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. On one screen, she saw the corporate structure of Blackwood Capital. On another, a deep-dive analysis of its core trading algorithms. Clara had always known her father was brilliant. In the 90s, he had been a legendary, albeit reclusive figure in the nascent world of fintech. He'd designed some of the foundational security protocols and trading architectures that the modern financial system was built upon, then abruptly retired in his late 40s, claiming he wanted a simpler life, away from the vultures of Wall Street. He'd cashed out his patents for a comfortable but not extravagant sum, and never looked back. Ethan had always dismissed him as Clara's quiet dad, the retired crypt monkey. He had no idea who Robert Thompson really was. No one did, except a very small, very powerful circle of old-school tech pioneers. Watching him now, Clara understood. Her quiet, gentle father was not just looking at data. He was mapping out a battlefield. He was sharpening weapons she couldn't comprehend. The stillness she had seen earlier was not resignation. It was the deep, focused calm of a grand master contemplating a chessboard, seeing not just the next move, but the entire game 20 moves ahead. He wasn't going to call a lawyer. He was going to war. A strange sense of peace settled over Clara. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a sliver of awe. Ethan Blackwood had built his empire on code and algorithms. He had just made a mortal enemy of the man who had written the language. Ethan Blackwood felt invincible. With Clara gone, a sentimental weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The penthouse, once softened by her presence, was now exactly as he liked it, a pristine, silent monument to his success. There were no more gentle questions about his day, no more talk of nurseries or baby names. There was only the clean, exhilarating hum of ambition. Isabella Sterling arrived from London 2 days later. She was everything Clara was not. Where Clara was warm, Isabella was polished steel. She was sharp, impossibly chic, with an analytical mind that mirrored Ethan's own. They didn't speak of love. They spoke of synergy, of market share, of consolidating power. Their relationship was a merger, a strategic alliance, and the chemistry between them was born not of passion, but of a shared, ravenous hunger for dominance. "Your ex-wife," Isabella said on her first night in the penthouse, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "Was she a problem?" "She was at a loose end," Ethan replied, not looking up from a tablet displaying market projections. "I've tied it. No legal complications, no emotional attachments." "I made her a financial offer she couldn't refuse." He lied smoothly. "She's pragmatic. She took the money and is looking for a fresh start." He saw no need to tell Isabella about the pregnancy. It was an irrelevant data point, a variable he had already contained. To mention it would be to show weakness, a crack in his perfect, calculated facade. Their days became a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, bankers, and PR firms. The merger of Blackwood Capital and Sterling Industries was being heralded in the financial press as the deal of the decade. Ethan Blackwood, the wunderkind of algorithmic trading, joins forces with the Sterling dynasty to create a new global tech titan, Sterling Blackwood. His face was on the cover of Forbes, his name spoken with reverence on cable news. He was no longer just rich. He was becoming a legacy. He completely forgot about Clara and her quiet father. They were a footnote from a previous chapter, irrelevant to the epic he was now writing. He'd had his assistant David wire a one-time severance of $500,000 to Clara's old bank account, an account he assumed she'd empty immediately. When the wire was returned a week later, marked refused, he felt a flicker of annoyance, not concern. "Stubborn," he muttered to David. "Fine, her loss. Let her see what it's like in the real world without my safety net." David Hayes, a young, fiercely intelligent analyst who had been with Ethan from the beginning, looked uneasy. "Sir, are you sure about this, I mean?" Her family is a retired programmer from some island," Ethan scoffed. "What are they going to do?" "Send me a strongly worded email. Focus on the Sterling integration." David, that's all that matters. But David, who had always admired Clara's kindness, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He had seen the returned wire transfer. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a statement. Meanwhile, on Bainbridge Island, Robert Thompson was not writing emails. He was activating a network not of lawyers, but of legends. His first call was to a man named Julian Ghost Vance, a cybersecurity savant living in a remote cabin in Utah. Julian owed his entire career to Robert, who had mentored him as a teenager and kept him out of federal prison. "Robert," Julian's voice crackled over the encrypted line. "It's been a decade. I thought you'd fallen off the earth." "I need a ghost in a machine, Julian," Robert said, his voice calm and steady. "A very specific machine. Blackwood Capital. Blackwood, the HFT Golden Boy. That place is a fortress. Their security architecture is top of the line." "I know," Robert said. "I designed the core principles it's based on 20 years ago, and I know the flaws I never bothered to publish." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "Oh, this is going to be fun. What do you need, old man? I don't want you to steal anything. I don't want you to break anything," Robert instructed. "I just want you to watch. I want to know every trade, every algorithm shift, every data packet that moves in and out of their servers. I want you to whisper in their wires." His next call was to an old colleague, a mathematics professor at MIT named Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who could see patterns in chaos that no one else could. "Aris," Robert said, "I'm sending you a data packet. It contains the trading philosophy of a certain firm. I need you to build a counter-rhythm, a model that doesn't defeat it but harmonizes with it in a way that introduces subtle discord." His third call was to a woman on the board of the largest pension fund in California, a woman he had tutored in quantitative analysis when she was just a struggling graduate student. He didn't ask for a favor. He simply advised her as an old friend to review the risk profile of her fund's exposure to newer aggressive HFT firms, particularly those with a single point of leadership. He was not gathering an army to lay siege to Ethan's castle. He was gathering termites, a quiet, invisible force that would chew away at the foundations until the entire gleaming structure was ready to collapse at the slightest push. He worked silently mostly at night while Clara slept, and Mary worried. He was a patient man, playing a very long game. He knew that to destroy a man like Ethan Blackwood, you didn't attack his money directly. You attacked his reputation, his genius, his very sanity. You made the machine he trusted above all else begin to lie to him. Back in Seattle, Ethan was celebrating. He and Isabella hosted a lavish party at the penthouse to announce their engagement and the finalization of the merger. The great and the good of the city were there, champagne flowed, and Ethan stood beside his new partner, feeling the immense intoxicating power of their combined influence. He raised a glass to the crowd. "To the future," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "To Sterling Blackwood, an empire built not on bricks and mortar, but on speed, intelligence, and a relentless vision." As the guests applauded, his phone buzzed. It was a priority alert from his head of operations. He glanced at it, a slight frown touching his lips. Subject: minor algorithmic drift, Alpha 7. Message seeing fractional percentage underperformance on the A7 algo. Probably market noise. Monitoring. Ethan dismissed it with a flick of his thumb. Market noise. An irrelevant data point. He put the phone back in his pocket and smiled at Isabella, oblivious to the fact that the first termite had just taken its first bite. The first week after the party, the minor algorithmic drift was just that, a whisper in the data streams. Ethan's lead quant, a jittery genius named Ben, assured him it was statistical noise. "The market's a volatile post-merger announcement, Ethan. It's just the system recalibrating. It'll smooth out." Ethan accepted the explanation. His Alpha 7 algorithm was his masterpiece, a complex piece of code that analyzed microsecond market fluctuations to execute thousands of trades per second. It had never failed him. The idea that it could be flawed was tantamount to questioning a law of physics. But the drift didn't smooth out. By the end of the second week, the fractional underperformance had become a consistent, albeit tiny, loss. It was like a slow leak in the engine of a Formula One car, not enough to stop it, but just enough to lose the race by a millisecond. In the world of high-frequency trading, a millisecond was an eternity. "Run a full diagnostic," Ethan commanded, his voice tight with irritation. "Strip the code down to its foundation and rebuild it. I want a report by morning." Ben and his team worked for 36 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and fear. The report landed on Ethan's desk with a thud. "We can't find anything," Ben said, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. "The code is perfect. The hardware is running at peak efficiency. There are no bugs, no breaches, no intrusions. On paper, it should be performing 5% better than it is." "That's not possible," Ethan snapped, throwing the report onto his desk. "Machines don't lie. Find it." This was Robert Thompson's first move, executed by Dr. Aris Thorne. The counter-rhythm wasn't an attack. It was a subtle form of financial aikido. It introduced a series of infinitesimally small, perfectly legal trades into the market that mimicked the behavior of Alpha 7, but were designed to resolve a fraction of a microsecond earlier. It was like a shadow that arrived just before the person casting it. The result was that Alpha 7 was constantly arriving a moment too late, buying a fraction of a cent too high, selling a fraction too low. The losses were tiny on each trade, but multiplied by millions of trades a day, they began to add up. It was an elegant, undetectable drain on Blackwood Capital's lifeblood. Ethan grew obsessed. He started spending his nights in the office, staring at walls of cascading data, trying to spot the ghost in his machine. He became irritable and paranoid, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. "Perhaps you're too close to it," Isabella suggested coolly one evening, as he ignored the gourmet meal she'd had catered. "You've been focused on this merger. Maybe you should let your team handle it." "My team can't see what I see," he retorted, his eyes never leaving the screen. "They're builders. I'm an architect. Something is wrong with the foundation." Then the second cut came. This one was executed by Julian "Ghost" Vance. Following Robert's instructions, Julian didn't hack the system. Instead, he exploited a long-forgotten backdoor in the server's firmware, a backdoor Robert himself had built 2 decades earlier for diagnostic purposes. He didn't steal data. He did something far more insidious. He slightly, almost imperceptibly, desynchronized the timestamps on a single random data server for a few nanoseconds every hour. The result was chaos masquerading as normalcy. A trade that was executed at 10:00 a.m. might be recorded as 10:00 a.m. To a human, it was meaningless. To a high-frequency trading algorithm that lived and died in the world of nanoseconds, it was catastrophic. It made the data untrustworthy. The system began to second-guess itself, creating micro-hesitations that led to missed opportunities. Ethan's profits, once a mighty river, were now a stream, and the stream was dwindling. He started lashing out, accusing his own people of incompetence or, worse, sabotage. "Someone in this room is leaking information," he roared during one tense board meeting, his eyes scanning the faces of his most trusted lieutenants. "Our strategies are being front-run. There is no other explanation." The paranoia began to infect the company culture. The collaborative energy that had fueled their rise was replaced by suspicion and fear. David Hayes watched his boss, the man he had once idolized, transform into a tyrant, haunted by a phantom he couldn't see. The third cut was the most subtle and perhaps the most brilliant. Robert, using a pseudonym, wrote a highly technical white paper titled Quantum Entanglement and Systemic Risk in Latency Arbitrage Models. It was a dense academic paper that he seeded onto obscure forums and university servers frequented by top-level quants and financial analysts. The paper didn't mention Blackwood Capital by name. It simply posited a theoretical vulnerability in the exact type of proprietary architecture Ethan used. It argued that such systems, in their relentless pursuit of speed, had created a structural fragility so profound that a minor, almost random external event, a solar flare, a specific sequence of market trades, could trigger a cascading failure. It was elegant, terrifying, and utterly plausible. The paper began to circulate, passed from one analyst to another like a forbidden text. It became a whisper on trading floors and in the research departments of major banks. Have you read the Quantum Entanglement paper? No one knew who wrote it, but its logic was impeccable. The woman on the pension fund's board, Robert's former student, read the paper. She saw the connection between the theoretical risk it described and the aggressive strategy of Blackwood Capital. At their next quarterly review meeting, she raised a concern. "I'm flagging Sterling Blackwood for a risk assessment," she announced. "Their performance has been erratic post-merger, and there is a theoretical framework suggesting their entire model could be a house of cards. I recommend we reduce our exposure until we have more clarity." The pension fund was one of Ethan's largest institutional investors. Their decision to publicly announce a risk assessment was not a withdrawal. It was a red flag, a signal to the entire market that something might be deeply wrong at the heart of Ethan Blackwood's empire. The whispers were becoming a conversation. The tiny cuts were beginning to bleed in earnest. Ethan, lost in his own fortress of code, was so busy looking for a single enemy soldier that he failed to realize the very ground beneath his feet was being systematically hollowed out. He felt the tremors, but he couldn't find the source of the earthquake. His confidence, once his greatest asset, was curdling into a fatal arrogance. He believed he was smarter than the market, smarter than any problem. He never once considered that the problem might be smarter than him. The pension fund's announcement was the first domino. In the fragile ecosystem of high finance, perception is reality. The news of a major risk assessment on Sterling Blackwood hit the financial wires like a shock wave. Ethan, who had always meticulously controlled his public image, was suddenly on the defensive. "It's a procedural review," he barked at a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who cornered him outside his office. "Our fundamentals are stronger than ever. This is nothing more than market jitters from our competitors who are terrified of our new scale." He projected confidence, but behind the scenes panic was beginning to set in. The jitters were real. Other institutional investors, spooked by the pension fund's move, and the circulating white paper, started making calls. They wanted reassurance. They wanted data. They wanted to know why his flagship algorithms were underperforming. Ethan and Isabella worked around the clock trying to calm their investors, but it was like trying to patch 100 leaks in a dam at once. For every investor they placated, 2 more would call, their voices laced with a new sharp edge of doubt. This was the moment Robert Thompson had been waiting for. The foundation was gone. It was time to push. From his quiet study on Bainbridge Island, he made one more call this time to a respected financial journalist he knew from his old life, a man who valued integrity above all else. "I'm sending you a package, Mark," Robert said. "No names, no sources, but the data inside is verified. It's a technical analysis of the trading architecture at a certain high-profile firm. It confirms with hard data the theoretical vulnerabilities outlined in a recent academic paper." The package was a masterwork of anonymous data dropping. It contained logs subtly altered by Julian to be untraceable yet accurate in their implication, showing the nanosecond timestamp discrepancies. It included a breakdown of Alpha 7's performance, highlighting the inexplicable and consistent losses. It was everything a journalist needed to connect the dots between the rumors and the reality. It didn't allege fraud or hacking. It alleged something far worse in the tech world: incompetence and fundamental design flaws. Mark's article, published under a dramatic headline, "Cracks in the Code is Sterling Blackwood's billion-dollar algo." A house of cards went viral. It was a match thrown on a field soaked in gasoline. The market opened the next day to a frenzy of selling. The stock price of Sterling Blackwood, which had soared after the merger announcement, began to plummet. It wasn't a dip, it was a cliff. Ethan stood on his trading floor, a modern-day Captain Ahab, on the deck of his sinking ship, watching the red numbers cascade down the screens. "Buy it back," he roared. "Initiate the share buyback program. Stabilize the price." They started pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into buying their own stock, trying to signal strength to the market. But it was like throwing buckets of water against a tsunami. The sell-off was too powerful, fueled by fear and the damning precision of the article. Then came the margin calls. Ethan had leveraged a significant portion of his personal and corporate assets to finance the hostile takeover of Sterling Industries. The banks that had loaned him the money had done so based on the valuation of his company. With the stock price in freefall, the value of his collateral was evaporating. The first call came from Deutsche Bank. "Mr. Blackwood, your loan-to-value ratio is breached. We need an immediate wire of $200 million to cover your position, or we will be forced to liquidate your holdings." Before he could even process it, another call came from JP Morgan. Then another from Goldman Sachs. The cascade had begun. They were demanding billions in collateral that he no longer had. In a desperate final gamble, Ethan turned to Harrison Sterling and Isabella. "We need an emergency infusion from the Sterling Family Trust," he said. His voice strained a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Now, to cover the calls." Isabella looked at him, her face unreadable. She exchanged a glance with her father, who had been watching the meltdown from the corner office with a grim satisfaction. "No," Harrison Sterling said, his voice laced with ice. "This company is toxic. Your name is toxic. The Sterling family will not be throwing good money after bad." "What?" Ethan stammered, looking at Isabella. "Isabella, we're partners. We're getting married." She gave a small, cruel smile. "The engagement was a means to an end, Ethan. A requirement for a merger that was until yesterday advantageous. It is no longer advantageous. In fact, you've become a liability to my family's name. The engagement is off. We're invoking the reputational damage clause in the merger agreement to sever ties. The Sterling name will be removed from the company by the end of the day." The betrayal was so swift, so absolute, it knocked the air from his lungs. He had been a tool, a disposable asset. He had discarded Clara for this, for a woman who was a colder, more ruthless version of himself. The banks didn't wait. As the news of the Sterlings pulling out hit the wire, the liquidations began. Blocks of his stock were dumped onto the market, causing the price to crash into the pennies. The algorithms that had made him a billionaire were being sold off for scrap value to cover his debts. His art collection, his jet, his other properties, all seized and liquidated by creditors within hours. By the time the market closed, the empire of Ethan Blackwood was gone. Sterling Blackwood was a defunct entity, its assets carved up and sold off. His personal fortune had been wiped out. He wasn't just back to zero, he was hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. He stood alone in the dark, cavernous trading floor, the screens now black. The silence was deafening. Just 48 hours earlier, he had been the king of this world. Now he was a ghost haunting its ruins. He stumbled out of the building a dazed, broken man. He didn't even have the money for a taxi. He started walking aimlessly through the rain-slicked streets of the city he once owned. And for the first time in the cold, hollow emptiness of his spectacular failure, he thought of Clara. He thought of her warmth, her kindness, and the child she was carrying. His child. The one piece of his life that had been real, the one thing of true value, and he had thrown it away for a ghost. The weight of that realization was more crushing than the loss of any fortune. The next few days were a blur of humiliation for Ethan. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a punchline in the financial world, a cautionary tale of hubris. He was evicted from the penthouse, the locks changed by the bank that now owned it. He walked out with nothing but a single cardboard box containing a few clothes and personal effects. His friends, the ones who had flocked to his parties and slapped him on the back, no longer answered his calls. He was a pariah. He ended up in a cheap run-down motel by the airport, the kind of place where the carpets were stained and the air smelled of stale smoke and despair. For 2 days, he didn't leave the room. He just sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, the full magnitude of his ruin crashing down on him. He had lost his money, his power, his reputation. But the loss that echoed loudest in the suffocating silence of the motel room was the loss of his humanity. He replayed that final conversation with Clara over and over in his mind. Her shocked, hurt face, the way he had called their child a complication, the cold, dismissive tone he had used to dismantle their life. He hadn't just been a ruthless businessman, he had been a cruel, empty shell of a man. Who had done this to him? He cycled through a list of enemies, Harrison Sterling rival hedge funds, disgruntled ex-employees. But none of it added up. The attack was too precise, too elegant. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a quiet, systemic unraveling. It felt less like a corporate raid and more like a judgment. His assistant, David Hayes, was the only person who came to see him. He found Ethan sitting in the dark room and placed a bottle of water and a bag of food on the rickety table. "I'm sorry, Ethan," David said, his voice quiet. "Save your pity." Ethan rasped, his voice hoarse. "It's not a pity," David said. I think I know who was behind this. Or at least I have a theory." Ethan looked up, a flicker of interest in his dead eyes. "The day after you asked Clara to leave," David began tentatively, "I saw the returned wire transfer, the one for $500,000. It was refused by an account belonging to a Robert Thompson, your father-in-law. Her dad, the retired programmer." Ethan scoffed. "What about him?" "I was curious, so I did some digging. Not corporate espionage, just public records, old articles from the early days of the internet. Robert Thompson isn't just some programmer, Ethan. In the late 90s, he was known in certain circles as the Architect. He designed the Loki protocol for secure transactions and the core logic for the Hyperion trading engine. Your entire company, my entire career. It's all built on the foundation of his work. He's a legend who chose to disappear." The pieces began to click into place in Ethan's shattered mind. the impossible-to-find flaw in his algorithm. The Whisper campaign is based on a deep, fundamental understanding of his systems. The attack wasn't random. It wasn't a rival. It was personal. It was precise. It was from the one man in the world he had never even considered a threat. The quiet father-in-law he had dismissed and disrespected. The man whose daughter he had broken. The realization was a physical blow. He wasn't outmaneuvered by a competitor. He was dismantled by a father protecting his child. It wasn't about money or power. It was about love and justice. All the things he had deemed liabilities. A wave of something akin to terror washed over him. He had picked a fight with a god of his own digital universe, and he had never even seen him. The sheer awesome power of Robert Thompson's quiet fury was terrifying. But beneath the terror was something else, a sliver of profound, gut-wrenching clarity. He deserved this. He had earned every moment of this agonizing downfall. He thought of Clara safe in her childhood home, protected by this quiet, brilliant giant of a man. He had thrown her out, believing he was casting her into the wilderness. In reality, he had sent her back to the safest fortress in the world. He looked at David. "Where is she?" David hesitated. "I'm not sure I should." "Please, David." Ethan's voice cracked, the arrogance finally completely gone. "I don't want to hurt her. I need to see her." David, seeing the genuine brokenness in his former boss's eyes, sighed. "She's not at her parents' house. Not primarily. I heard from a friend who knows her family that she's been volunteering. Something about helping people who are less fortunate. There's a community outreach center in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. The New Beginnings Center. She's there most days." Ethan nodded slowly. The irony was almost poetic. While he was losing his soulless empire, she was rebuilding her life by helping others. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about getting his fortune back. It wasn't about asking for forgiveness, because he knew he didn't deserve it. It was about acknowledging the truth of what he had done to the person he had wronged most grievously. It was about facing the wreckage he had made not of his company, but of his own soul. He thanked David, took a long shower, and put on the last clean shirt he owned. For the first time in his life, Ethan Blackwood was going to face a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. He was going to face his wife. The New Beginnings Community Center was a humble brick building a world away from the gleaming steel and glass towers Ethan had once inhabited. The sound of children playing echoed from a small yard, and the smell of soup drifted from an open window. It was a place of real, tangible human connection, everything his former life had lacked. He saw her through the window before he went in. Clara, now visibly pregnant, was sitting at a table patiently helping a young girl with her homework. She looked serene. There was a quiet strength in her face he had never seen before. The ordeal hadn't broken her. It had forged her. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair was tied back, and she was in that moment more beautiful than he had ever seen her in a designer gown. His heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide from the shame that was threatening to consume him. But he forced his feet to move, to push open the door and step inside. The warmth of the center was a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. A few people looked up as he entered his expensive, though now slightly disheveled suit, marking him as an outsider. Clara's head lifted, and her eyes met across the room. The laughter and chatter in the room seemed to fade away. For a moment she just stared at him. There was no hatred in her eyes, no anger, There was a deep, profound sadness, and something else, pity, that more than anything broke him. She excused herself from the table and walked toward him, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She stopped a few feet away, creating a space between them that felt like a chasm. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm and even. "What are you doing here?" He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All the clever speeches, the boardroom negotiations, the commanding orders, all of it was gone. He was left with nothing but the raw, ugly truth of who he was. So he did the only thing that felt right, the only thing that could possibly convey the depth of his shame and the totality of his defeat. In the middle of the crowded community center, Ethan Blackwood, the former titan of industry, sank to his knees. He bowed his head low, his forehead nearly touching the scuffed linoleum floor. It was not a gesture of supplication or a plea for forgiveness. It was an act of complete and total surrender, an acknowledgement of his monstrous crime against her and their child. A gasp went through the room. Clara stood silent, watching the man who had thrown her out, now kneeling at her feet. "Get up, Ethan," she said, softly, but her voice held a new authority. He slowly, painfully rose to his feet, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't come here to ask you to forgive me, Clara," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "There are no words, no apologies that could ever be enough. I came here to tell you that I finally understand. Everything I thought was important, the money, the power, the empire, it was all dust. It was nothing. The only thing that ever had any real value in my entire life was you and our baby. And I threw it away. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you." He finally dared to look up at her. "Your father," he said with a ragged breath. "He is a great man. He gave me a lesson I desperately needed to learn." Clara listened, her expression unchanging. She had imagined this moment in her darkest hours, fantasized about screaming at him, about making him feel a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on her. But seeing him now, a hollowed-out, broken man, she felt no desire for revenge. She only felt a sad, quiet finality. "I accept your apology, Ethan," she said, and he felt a flicker of hope. But she continued, "I accept it, not for you, but for me, and for our child. We deserve to live without the weight of that hatred. But that doesn't mean there is a path back for us. You didn't just break my heart. You showed me who you truly are. I can't ever unsee that." She took a step back, reinforcing the distance between them. "I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to raise our son, and I'm going to teach him to be everything you were not: kind, compassionate, and a man of integrity. A man like his grandfather." The words were not delivered with malice, but with a simple, devastating clarity. "You can be a part of his life if you choose," she went on, "but not as my husband, not as the man who lives in my house. You can be his father, but you have to earn that title. You have to rebuild your life, not your fortune, but your character. You have to become a man that our son can one day look up to. That is your only way forward." With that, she turned and walked back to the little girl who was waiting for her, leaving Ethan standing alone in the center of the room. He watched her go, the finality of her words settling into his bones. It wasn't the ending he had wanted, but it was the one he deserved. There would be no magical reconciliation, no wiping the slate clean. There was only a long, arduous road ahead, a chance not to reclaim his lost glory, but to build a new life from the ashes, a life of meaning and perhaps one day redemption. He turned and walked out of the community center, back into the rain. He had lost his fortune overnight. He had bowed before the woman he had wronged, and in doing so, he had taken the first painful step on the bridge of humility, leaving the monster he had been behind, with a long and uncertain journey toward the man he hoped he could one day become. The story of Ethan Blackwood isn't just about a man losing his fortune. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth is not measured in stock prices or bank accounts. It's measured in integrity, in love, and in the promises we keep to the people who trust us. He had an empire at his fingertips, but was poorer than he could ever imagine. In the end, it took losing everything for him to find the slightest chance at gaining something real, a chance at redemption. Clara's journey shows us the incredible power of quiet strength and the unbreakable bond of family. It reminds us that you don't need an army to fight a monster. Sometimes all you need is a father's unwavering love and the courage to stand on your own. What would you have done in Clara's place? Do you believe a man like Ethan can truly change? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you and served as a powerful lesson, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for listening.